The envelope came on a Tuesday. Ada Mercer was 72 years old, and she had buried her husband 3 years before. She knew his handwriting the way she knew her own hands, and that was his handwriting on the envelope. She stood on the porch and did not move. The mail carrier's truck was already gone down the gravel drive. A dog barked somewhere past the Kaufman's fence. Ada looked at the looping W in Walter, the tall W he always made too big, the one that curled back on itself like a wave that couldn't decide to break. Her name sat under it. Mrs. Ada Mercer, Route 2, Delford, Iowa. Walter had been dead since the spring of the year the barn roof went. 3 years. She had washed his coffee cup and put it away. She had given his coats to the Lutheran church. She had learned to sleep on both sides of the bed so it wouldn't feel so wide. And now here was his hand, in ink, on a white envelope in her fingers. Ada went inside and sat down at the kitchen table. She did not open it right away. She was not a foolish woman. She had kept the books at Delford Consolidated School for 34 years, every ledger balanced to the penny, and she did not believe in ghosts. Dead men do not mail letters. There was a reason. There is always a reason. She turned the envelope over. No return address, a single postmark. Marshall County, stamped 11 days ago. Her hands were steady. Her hands had always been steady. That was the thing people forgot about her lately, since Walter died, since her hips started to give. They talked to her slow and loud, as if 72 meant she'd lost the wiring. Her son-in-law did it worst of all. Ada got the paring knife from the drawer and slipped the envelope along the top the way Walter always did. Never tearing, always cutting clean. Inside was one sheet of lined paper folded in thirds. She unfolded it. Ada, it began. If you're reading this, then Hollis kept his word, and it's been 3 years. And I'm sorry to come knocking after you've had time to fold me up and put me away. She had to stop. She set the paper flat on the oilcloth and pressed it with both palms, the way you press a thing that might blow off the table. It was Walter. The pencil first, then ink over it. He always drafted a hard letter in pencil and went over it in ink when he was sure. She could see the gray ghost of the pencil under the black. And the sevens. He crossed his sevens with a little slash, a European habit he'd picked up in the war and never dropped. And there in the second line was a date with a 7 crossed through the middle. No one alive crossed their sevens like Walter. Not their daughter, not their grandson, not any man in Delford. Ada read the rest, sitting very still. I never wanted to be the kind of husband who runs the money and keeps you in the dark, but I did it, and I need to tell you why. And I couldn't do it to your face because you'd have argued, and you'd have been right to. So I'm doing it like a coward from the far side, and you can be mad at a dead man all you want. There's a thing I hid. There's a thing I found out. Go see Hollis Breck at the feed store. He has the rest. Don't tell Garrett. Whatever you do, don't tell Garrett first. Yours, always, W. Garrett was her son-in-law. Ada folded the letter along Walter's own creases. Outside the window, the corn stood green and shoulder-high, and a red-winged blackbird sat on the wire and dropped off it. She looked at the crossed 7 again. Then she got up, rinsed her cup, put it in the rack, and went to find her good shoes. She was 72, and she had 34 years of knowing when a number didn't add up. Something in her life had not been adding up for a long while. She had just never had the second column to check it against. Now she did. She sat in the truck a while before she turned the key, and she let herself think back, which she didn't often allow. She had married Walter Mercer in the fall of 1954, in the Lutheran church on 2nd Street, in a dress her mother sewed. She was 19. He was 24 and just home from Korea, quiet in a way that some men came back quiet, and he had a way of crossing his sevens with a slash through the middle that she'd never seen. She asked him about it their second month married, teasing because it looked foreign and fussy on a farm boy from Iowa. Learned it over there, he said, from a fellow in my outfit, Frenchman's boy. He said an American 7 and a 1 look too much alike, and a mistake on a 7 can cost a man. He was cleaning a shotgun at the kitchen table when he said it. A number ought to be exactly what it is, no guessing. She'd laughed at him then. A number ought to be exactly what it is. She'd married a man who talked like a ledger. But it stuck to her, that saying, and 34 years later at the school she'd made every girl in the office cross her 7s the same way, and half of Delford wrote them like that now and didn't know where they'd caught it. Walter farmed and drove a milk route and later worked the county road crew. and Ada kept the books at the school. And between them, they raised Marlene and paid off the house and buried both sets of parents. Walter never made much, but he never lost a dime he didn't mean to, and he had a horror of a man being cheated, of a family being taken advantage of, that ran deep in him, and that she'd always thought was just his way. She understood now it wasn't just his way. It was a promise he'd been keeping to her for 50 years, in secret, with a savings account she never knew about, and a tin behind a loose joist. He had loved that 80 acres of the Ferris Quarter more than any ground he owned. It ran up from the creek into oak timber his own grandfather had left standing, and he'd take her up there in October to look at the color, and he'd say the same thing every time. Some fool will want to cut this someday, Ada. Don't you let him. She'd nodded and thought he was being sentimental about trees. He hadn't been sentimental. He'd been telling her the future. He'd known there'd be a fool, and he'd known it would be family, and he'd spent his last winter making sure she'd have the paper to stop him. Ada wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, one time, and turned the key. The old fool. The dear, stubborn, careful old fool. He'd loved her in numbers, because numbers were the one language he trusted not to lie. And now she was going to answer him in the only language they'd ever really shared. She was going to balance the books. The feed store sat at the north end of Delford, where the pavement quit and the grain elevator threw its long shadow over the tracks. Hollis Breck had run it since before Ada was married. He was older than Walter would have been, a wide, slow man in a Carhartt coat gone the color of dust. And when Ada came through the door, he was up off his stool before the bell finished ringing. Ada, he said. He did not say what happened. He looked at her a second, then he said, "Have you eaten today?" "I'm all right, Hollis." "That's not what I asked." He went to the back and came out with a folding chair and a bottle of orange pop from the cooler. And he set both in front of her like a man laying down cards. "Sit. Drink that. Your color's off." She sat. She drank. It was sweeter than she remembered pop being. "You got his letter," Hollis said. It wasn't a question. 3 years to the week. That's how he wanted it. Hollis lowered himself onto the stool and it groaned under him. He come in here, must have been that last winter. Sick already, though, he wasn't telling. Give me an envelope and a note and $800 in a coffee can. Said, mail this to Ada 3 years after I'm gone, not a day before. And if you spend the money, that's fine, but do the mailing. I told him he was being a damn fool. He said, Hollis, 3 years is how long it takes a woman like Ada to stop crying and start thinking. Then she'll be ready. Hollis looked at his own hands. He knew you better than most men know their wives. He said you had the rest. Hollis nodded slow. He got up again and went to the office in the back, a plywood room with a space heater, and he came out with a manila envelope soft at the corners from 3 years in a drawer. He held it a moment before he gave it over. I don't know what's in it, he said. I never looked, but he told me one thing to tell you when you came. He said, tell Ada to check the number against the tin. The tin? That's all he said. Check the number against the tin. Ada took the envelope. It was heavier than a letter. There was a shape in it, flat and stiff, a document folded once. She did not open it there. Some things you don't open in front of even a kind man. Thank you, Hollis. You come back if you need feeding, he said. I mean it. Don't you go sit in that house not eating. She drove home the long way, past the school where she'd kept the books, past the cemetery where Walter was under a plain gray stone because he'd said no fuss. And she did not stop it either. In her kitchen, she opened the manila envelope with the paring knife, clean along the top, and slid out what was inside. It was a deed. A warranty deed to 80 acres of ground north of the county road, the old Ferris Quarter, timber and pasture, recorded in the name of Walter J. Mercer. And it was clear. No lien, no mortgage, paid. Ada sat down hard. That 80 acres had been sold. She was sure of it. 4 years back, before Walter got bad, Garrett had come to them at Sunday dinner with papers and a fountain pen and a lot of soft words about how the land was a burden, how the taxes ate them alive, how a nice man he knew would take it off their hands and put money in the bank where it was safe. Walter had signed. Ada remembered the pen. She remembered Garrett's hand steering Walter's over the line. But here was the deed, still in Walter's name, dated after the day Garrett said it was sold. Under the deed was a second sheet. Walter's hand again, pencil under ink. The land was never sold, Ada. Garrett had me sign a paper he said was for the sale. It wasn't. It was a power of attorney. He's been using it for 4 years. Check the account. Check the tin under the third-floor joist in the fruit cellar. The loose one. The real numbers are in the tin. He thinks I never knew. I knew. I was too sick to fight him and too proud to tell you I'd been played. Don't be too proud. Yours, W. Ada read it twice. Then she went down the cellar stairs in the dark, one hand on the cold stone wall, and she felt along the floor joists over the shelves of mason jars until she found the one that was loose. Behind it, wrapped in a feed sack, was a tin. A tobacco tin, wax sealed around the lid, the way Walter sealed everything he meant to last. She carried it up into the light and broke the wax with her thumbnail. Inside were bank statements, not the ones that came to the house, different ones. A savings account at the Delford Farmers and Merchants Bank, opened in the name of Ada and Walter Mercer, joint, with rights of survivorship. Ada had never seen it. Balance, 4 years ago, $18,400. She turned the pages. Withdrawal, withdrawal, withdrawal. 500 here, 1,200 there, always under the amount that made a bank ask questions. Signed each time by power of attorney. G. Rourke, for W. Mercer. Garrett Rourke, her son-in-law. The last statement in the tin was 3 years old. Balance then, 4,000 and change. And Walter's note clipped to it. He's not done. He'll take it all and then he'll come for the land. And he'll tell you it was always his idea and you agreed. Prove him wrong. The deed is real. The account is real. Go to Doris. Ada sat at the table a long time. The kitchen got dim and she did not turn on the light. She thought about Sunday dinners. She thought about the way Garrett cut her food at Thanksgiving without asking. The way he answered questions the doctor asked her. The way he'd say, real gentle. Now, Ada, you know you get confused about money. Let me handle it. She had believed him a little. That was the part that burned. She had let a smooth man in a golf shirt make her doubt her own arithmetic. And she had balanced the Delford School's books to the penny for 34 years. She did not cry. She had done her crying, 3 years of it, and Walter had known to the week when it would run out. She turned on the light and got a clean sheet of paper and a pencil, and she began, in her own steady hand, to write down every number. Doris Nagel had been head teller at the Farmers and Merchants for 29 years. She was a broad woman with wire-rimmed glasses on a chain and hands that had counted more money than most people ever see. And when Ada came in the next morning and asked to speak with her private, Doris took one look at her face and led her straight back to the little room where they did the safe deposit signings. Sit down, Ada, Doris said. You want coffee? You look like you haven't eaten. I need you to look at something first. Ada laid it all out on the table. The deed, the statements from the tin, Walter's letters. Doris put on her glasses and went through it slow, page by page, and her mouth got flatter and flatter until it was just a line. I remember this account, Doris said finally, quiet. I opened it myself. Walter came in, must be 6 years ago, said he wanted something set aside that didn't run through the household books. Said a man ought to have a cushion for his wife that nobody could talk her out of. She tapped the withdrawal pages. These went through the drive-up mostly, and the new accounts desk, not my window. If they'd come to my window, I'd have called you, joint account or not, POA or not, I'd have called you. Is it legal, what he did? Doris took her glasses off. A power of attorney's legal. Using it to bleed a sick man dry and lie to his wife about it is a different animal. That's not banking, Ada. That's theft with a signature on it. She was quiet a second. And there's the other thing. Who at this bank kept steering it away from my window? Ada waited. Marcus Kell, Doris said. Our fine branch manager. Golfs with your son-in-law every Saturday. I've watched them shake hands in that parking lot for 4 years. She put her glasses back on. You've eaten today? No. Then before we do one more thing, you're going to eat. I've got half a chicken salad in the break room and you're going to have it. And then we're going to be smart. She stood up. Because if we walk out there mad, they'll say you're a confused old widow who doesn't understand her own finances. That's the story they'll tell. So we're not going to be mad. We're going to be right, on paper, with copies, before either of those men knows the ground's moved under him. Ada ate the chicken salad. It was the first thing that had tasted like anything in 2 days. While she ate, she thought about Garrett Rourke, and she let herself see him clear for the first time. He'd married Marlene 20 years back. He sold farm insurance, and then farm equipment, and then, when those went slow, he sold himself mostly. A wide smile and a firm handshake, and a way of standing too close when he wanted something. Ada had never warmed to him. But Marlene loved him, and the grandkids came, and a mother learns to hold her tongue. He'd started coming around more after Walter got sick, which, at the time, it seemed like kindness. He drove Walter to the clinic in Marshalltown. He sat with him. He brought papers for Walter to sign, always with a story about taxes or the estate or making things easy on Ada later. And Walter, doped on the pain pills and tired in his bones, had signed what a son-in-law put in front of him. Ada had thought back then, isn't that good of Garrett, taking the burden off? That was the trick of a certain kind of thief. He didn't come with a gun. He came with a casserole and a fountain pen and the word family, and he made you thank him while he did it. The worst of it wasn't the money. Ada could live without the money. She'd lived on a school bookkeeper's wages her whole life, and she knew how to make a dollar behave. The worst of it was the doubt he'd planted. For 4 years, Garrett had told her, gentle and patient, that she got confused, that she couldn't be trusted with figures anymore, that her mind was going the way old minds go. Now, Ada, you get all turned around. And a small, mean part of her had started to believe it. She'd catch herself checking the checkbook 3 times, wondering if she'd made the error he was always so sure she'd made. He'd taken her money with one hand and her confidence with the other. And the confidence was the harder loss. Walter had known that too. Don't be too proud, he'd written. He'd known his wife would rather be robbed than be pitied, and he'd found the one way to reach her that didn't cost her pride. He'd made it arithmetic. Check the number against the tin. He'd known that if he handed her a column to balance, the old sureness would come back into her hands. And it had. The moment she'd broken that wax seal, Doris came back in with 2 cups of coffee and set one down. You've got your color back, she said, looking at Ada's face. Good. Now let's ruin some men's July. They worked for 3 days, quiet as church mice. Doris pulled the full account history, every transaction, printed and stamped and certified with the bank's own seal, which was a thing a head teller could do and a branch manager couldn't stop without a reason he didn't want to give. Ada took the deed to the county recorder's office in the courthouse, a marble hall that smelled of floor wax and old paper. And the young clerk there ran the chain of title and looked up, puzzled. This deed's never been transferred, the clerk said. It's still in Walter Mercer's name, free and clear. There's a power of attorney recorded, but no sale. Whoever told you it sold, ma'am, told you wrong. I know, Ada said. I'm just getting it in writing. There was one bad afternoon in the middle of it. Ada was at Errol Vance's office over the drugstore, and Garrett called the house and left a message on the machine, and she played it when she got home. His voice was warm as ever. Ada, honey, it's Garrett. Marlene says you've been running around the courthouse and the bank, and I'm worried about you. You're going to work yourself into a state. Whatever's got you confused, you just call me and I'll straighten it out, all right? That's what I'm here for. Now, Ada, don't go bothering those busy people with things you don't understand. Let me handle it. Let me handle it. Now, Ada. She stood in the kitchen and listened to it twice, and the old doubt tried to rise in her, that soft, familiar undertow. Maybe he's right. Maybe I've got it wrong. Maybe I am confused. Then she looked at the tin on the table, at $18,400 gone in withdrawals small enough to hide, at a deed the courthouse said had never sold, at Walter's crossed sevens, and the undertow let go of her ankles. She did not call him back. She took the little cassette out of the answering machine and set it in the tin with the rest, labeled in her own hand. And she thought, you keep talking, Garrett. Every word you say now is a word I'll be able to show a judge. She got everything in writing. Certified copies, 3 sets. One for a lawyer, a plain, honest man named Errol Vance who kept an office over the drugstore and read every page twice, and then took his glasses off and said, Mrs. Mercer, you've got them cold. Both of them. One set for herself in the tin, back behind the loose joist, and one set she was saving for a room full of people, though she hadn't told anyone that part yet. If you've made it this far into Ada's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. The Delford farmers and merchants held an annual meeting every July in the Grange Hall, open to all depositors, coffee and cake, and a report from the manager on the bank's fine, healthy year. Half the town went for the cake. Ada Mercer had not been in years. This year she called the bank and asked, in a small, confused voice she put on like a coat, whether an old woman might come and maybe say a few words to thank the bank for taking such good care of her. Marcus Kell got on the phone himself, all warmth, and said, "Of course, Mrs. Mercer, of course, we'd be honored. You just come and we'll give you a nice moment." He thought she was going to thank them. Garrett would be there too. He was on the Depositors Advisory Committee, a title that meant nothing and that he wore like a medal. Ada had gone to Sunday dinner at her daughter's house the week before, sat at the table while Garrett carved the roast, and let him pat her hand and say, "Now, Ada, you're not worrying yourself about money again, are you? You know you get all turned around. That's what family's for." He'd said it before, that same line, 100 times over 4 years. "Now, Ada, you get all turned around." She had smiled and said, "No, Garrett, I wasn't worrying." Her daughter Marlene had smiled too, tired, not knowing. That was the hard part. Marlene didn't know. Ada had decided her girl would find out in the same room as everyone else, because a thing done in the dark stays a lie, and she was finished with the dark. She wore her navy dress to the Grange Hall, the one she wore to funerals, and she carried a handbag with the certified copies in it, and Doris drove her. The hall was full. Folding chairs and the smell of coffee in the big steel urns, church lady sheet cake on a card table, kids running in the back. Marcus Kell stood at the front in a good suit and gave his report. The numbers up, the community strong, the bank a family. He said family 3 times. Garrett sat in the second row in a golf shirt with his arms crossed, comfortable, a man among friends. When Kell got to the part where he liked to bring up a valued longtime customer, he smiled out at the crowd and found Ada, and he said, "And I believe one of our most beloved depositors has a few words. Mrs. Ada Mercer. Ada, come on up." Careful of the step. Careful of the step, loud and slow. Ada came up. She did not hurry. She stood behind the little podium and looked out at the faces, at the Kaufmans and the Nagels and Hollis Breck standing in the back with his hat in his hands, at her daughter near the aisle, at Garrett with his easy arms crossed. "Thank you," Ada said. Her voice was steady. Her voice had always been steady. "My husband Walter banked here 50 years. I kept the books at the school 34. So I know a little about numbers. I want to talk to you tonight about some numbers." Kell was still smiling. Garrett was still comfortable. 4 years ago, Ada said, my son-in-law Garrett Rourke had my husband sign a paper. Garrett said it was to sell our 80 acres north of the county road. Walter was sick. Walter signed. But the paper wasn't a sale. She opened her handbag. It was a power of attorney. I have the recorded copy from the courthouse. The land was never sold. It's still in my husband's name, free and clear, right here. The hall had gone quiet the way a hall does when people stop chewing. With that paper, Ada went on, Garrett drained a savings account my husband set aside for me. An account I never knew I had. $18,400 taken out a little at a time, always small enough that nobody had to ask a question. Signed each time, G. Rourke, for W. Mercer. I have the certified history from this bank, stamped by your own head teller, she held it up. And every one of those withdrawals went through the drive-up window and the new accounts desk. Never once through the teller line, where somebody might have known me and picked up a phone. I wondered why. Then I found out my son-in-law golfs every Saturday with your branch manager. She looked at Marcus Kell. Marcus Kell was not smiling anymore. Now, Ada said, and her voice never rose, you can tell yourselves I'm a confused old woman who gets all turned around. My son-in-law's told me that for 4 years. Now, Ada, he says, you get all turned around. He said it to me last Sunday over the roast. She set the papers down on the podium, one at a time, tap, tap, tap. But I balanced this town's school accounts to the penny for 34 years, and I balanced these too. And I've got 3 men who'll swear to the paper, a lawyer, the county recorder, and your own Doris Nagel. So the only person turned around in this room, Garrett, is you. Garrett Rourke had come up out of his chair. This is a private family matter, he started, loud. And she's not well. Everybody knows Ada's not been well since Walter. I've never been better, Ada said. It was the deed that did it in the end. She held it up over her head so the back of the room could see the county seal, and Errol Vance stood up from the third row where nobody had noticed him and said, in his flat lawyer's voice, "I've reviewed every document. Mrs. Mercer's account is accurate and it's actionable. I'd advise both Mr. Rourke and Mr. Kell to say nothing further tonight without counsel." And a man in the second row that Ada didn't know turned out to be from the county paper, the Delford Register, and he was writing fast in a little spiral book. "Ada," Garrett said, and now the warmth was gone and something uglier had come up under it. "You listen to me. You're embarrassing this whole family. You've got some old papers, and you've spun yourself a story, and everybody here can see you're not right." Marlene. "Marlene, tell her. Tell your mother she's confused." The hall waited. Marlene stood by the aisle with her hand over her mouth. She looked at her husband, and she looked at her mother standing straight behind the podium in her funeral dress, steady as a fence post. And she looked at the deed with the county seal held up over the old woman's head. "She crosses her sevens like Dad," Marlene said. Her voice broke on it. "She's not confused, Garrett. She's never been confused a day in her life. You are." And she sat down and put her face in her hands, and that was the end of it right there. A man can talk his way past strangers. He can't talk his way past his own wife saying it out loud in front of the whole town. Garrett kept talking anyway. He said something about lawyers and something about lies and something about how they'd all be sorry. And his voice got higher and faster, and the county attorney's investigator, who it turned out was also in the room because Doris had made one quiet phone call, wrote it all down. No one was listening to Garrett anymore. People had turned in their folding chairs to look at Ada instead. Old Hank from the hardware store started to clap, slow, just his two rough hands, and then Hollis Breck joined him, with his hat still in his fist. And then the whole hall was doing it. And Garrett Rourke stood in the middle of it all, still moving his mouth. And that is the loneliest a loud man ever gets. Ada didn't clap and didn't smile. She gathered her papers off the podium, tapped them square the way she'd squared 1,000 stacks of school receipts, and she said into the microphone, one last time, quiet, "A number ought to be exactly what it is. My husband taught me that. There's no confusion in it at all." Then she stepped down, careful of the step on her own, and Doris met her at the bottom and took her arm. And the two of them walked out of the Grange Hall into the July evening, while the whole town was still on its feet. The rest happened the way these things happen, slow and then all at once. The bank's board met the following week, and Marcus Kell was gone by Friday, allowed to resign, which in a town like Delford is the same as being run out, only quieter. The county attorney took Doris's certified records and Errol Vance's file and charged Garrett Rourke with theft and elder financial exploitation. And the $18,400 came back to Ada in a settlement, with interest, because the alternative was a trial Garrett could not win. The 80 acres of the old Ferris quarter stayed in the Mercer name, timber and pasture, exactly where Walter had kept them. The Delford Register ran it on the front page. "Widow exposes scheme at bank meeting." There was a picture of Ada in her navy dress. She kept a copy in the tin, behind the loose joist, next to Walter's letters. And she did not read it more than once, because she had never done any of it to see her name in the paper. Marlene left Garrett before the leaves turned. She came to Ada's kitchen one evening and stood in the doorway and couldn't speak. And Ada got up and put the kettle on, and the first thing she said to her daughter was, not "what happened," or "I told you," or "how could you have missed it?" The first thing Ada said was, "Have you eaten? Sit down, I'll fix you something." Because that was the language of the women who'd been kind to her, Hollis and Doris, and she had learned it, and she meant to pass it on. Ada fried her 2 eggs and a slice of ham and set it in front of her daughter, and she sat down across the oilcloth and waited while Marlene ate, and she did not say a single hard word. There would have been plenty to say. She could have said, "I never trusted him." She could have said, "You should have listened to your father." She could have said, "You called me confused too," more than once, at that same table. All of it was true, and none of it would feed a hungry woman, so Ada kept it behind her teeth. Her own mother had taught her that. You want to help somebody who's been knocked down, you don't hand them a lecture. You hand them a plate. The rest can wait for daylight. They sat up late. Marlene cried and Ada didn't. And around midnight, Marlene asked how her mother had known, how she'd found the thread and pulled it. And Ada went and got the first letter, the one that came on a Tuesday in Walter's own hand. Marlene looked at it a long time. She touched the looping W. She touched the crossed 7. "That's really Dad's," she whispered. "To the last stroke," Ada said. "He wrote it before he died. He knew what Garrett was. He knew I'd need 3 years before I could hear it. So he waited 3 years and then he told me. From where he is, and he was right about all of it. The stubborn old fool." She folded the letter back along its own creases. "He always crossed his 7s funny. I used to tease him for it. Turns out that's how I knew it was real." Winter came. Ada put up her mason jars, tomatoes and beans and the last of the corn, and lined them on the cellar shelves under the loose joist where the tin still sat. The 80 acres she deeded, half to Marlene and half to a land trust that kept the timber standing, because Walter had loved that timber and she wasn't going to let anybody cut it for a quick dollar. Not ever again. The settlement money she mostly gave away, some to the Lutheran church, some to Hollis Breck, who wouldn't take it until she told him it was Walter's wish, which was a small lie in a good cause. Some to a fund at the Farmers and Merchants, under new management now, that Doris helped her set up, a little account any older person in Marshall County could turn to when the numbers stopped making sense, and they were afraid to say so. Ada named it the Walter Fund. She did not explain the name to anyone who didn't already know. The ripple went further than Ada ever meant it to. After the Register ran the story, other people started coming to Doris at the bank, quiet, embarrassed, older folks mostly, a widower out on the Gladbrook Road whose nephew had been signing his checks, a pair of sisters in their 80s who'd handed a smooth young financial man their savings on a handshake and hadn't seen a statement in a year, a retired schoolteacher, Ada's own age, who'd been too ashamed to tell anyone she couldn't find $4,000. Every one of them had been told the same thing Ada had. "You're confused. Let me handle it. Don't worry your head." It turned out to be the most common lie in the county, and nobody had said it out loud until a 72-year-old woman in a navy dress said it into a microphone at the Grange Hall. Doris helped each of them the way she'd helped Ada. "Have you eaten? Sit down. Let's be smart, on paper, before anybody knows the ground is moved." 2 more cases went to the county attorney inside a year. A young man in a nice suit left town. The bank, under its new manager, put up a plain printed card at every window that said, in large type, "No one at this bank will ever tell you you are too confused to see your own account. Ask us anything." It was Doris who wrote it. She showed it to Ada before she hung it up, and Ada read it and had to look out the window a minute at the blackbirds. People in Delford treated her different after that meeting, not slower and louder anymore. When she came into the feed store or the bank or the church basement, men took their hats off and women asked her opinion on things that mattered. And nobody, not one soul, ever again said, "Now Ada," in that soft, steering voice, because the whole town had watched what happened to the last man who did. She missed Walter still. That didn't stop. Some mornings she poured 2 cups of coffee before she remembered, and she'd drink one and pour the other down the sink and stand at the window a minute, watching the blackbirds drop off the wire. But the missing had a different weight to it now. He hadn't left her folded up and helpless. He'd left her a paring knife and a crossed 7 and 80 acres of standing timber, and the plain, sure knowledge that he'd trusted her, at the end, to be smarter than the men who thought she wasn't. On the anniversary of the day the letter came, Ada went down to the cellar and got the tin and carried it up to the kitchen table. The same table, the same oilcloth. She took out Walter's first letter and read the last line one more time. "Yours always, W." Then she got a clean sheet of lined paper and a pencil, because a hard letter you always draft in pencil first. And she began to write one of her own, to Marlene, to be opened later, someday, when her girl might need to hear a steady voice from the far side of a thing. She drafted it in pencil. When she was sure of every word, she went over it in ink. And at the bottom, where she signed her name, Ada Mercer crossed the 7 in the date with a little slash through the middle, the way Walter always had, so that whoever read it would know, without being told, exactly whose hand it came from and exactly how true it was. The corn stood dead and gold in the fields. The wood stove ticked, and an old woman at a kitchen table wrote her name in a hand that couldn't be faked and sealed it in a tin and put it back behind the loose joist to wait for the day it would be needed.